the lesson in empathy economics is not all weed is created equal.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've done over 100 of these lessons in empathy economics, and I thought I've done spirits, I've done alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
I've touched on things, whether it's not about endorsing marijuana or edibles or
Mm-hmm.
anything, but it's about if you are going to partake in something, how do I do it better? And, as Canadians, as people in Ontario, we have now access to things because it's legal. We can grow it ourselves. There's all of these different components. And just like buying a banana, um, just like buying a box of crackers, there's a series of questions that we need to ask to know that we are sourcing something that's clean. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very difficult in the landscape of cannabis. I would say um, it's very analogous to food, and that it's not easy to determine what, like if you're looking for the highest quality tomato and you're trying to gain access to the highest quality tomato, it's not like you can just go into the grocery store and find, you know, high quality tomato right here, highest mineral, highest vitamin, grown in ethical ways, local, picked right. Like there's so much greenwashing. There's so, like you said, about packaging in an earlier conversation we were having. You can package up a turd and sell it in a grocery store,
Yeah.
and people are buying it, right? Or
So
you
let's
can.
talk, but let's talk about exactly where you went with this, which is the tomato, which I would
Mhm.
say the healthiest tomato does not come from a grocery store. The healthiest tomato comes from the farmer, which could be you
Totally. So
or a
yeah,
farmer that you trust. So is that transferable to cannabis? Like, can I buy weed in that way?
it's even harder in cannabis. So if you want, so I would say the best tomato, or among the best tomatoes, would
Yes.
probably come from your own backyard. Certainly from, if you are able to take the time to learn what is high quality soil, and you can make some really good soil, and you can learn all the techniques that go into how I would grow a tomato. You can grow a really great tomato in your backyard. And so in cannabis, that works as well. You can learn how to grow 4 plants legally in your own backyard. There's probably going to be a steep learning curve if you're not familiar with growing, but it could be done. And it's a huge investment of your own time, both in the knowledge and in the hands-on, getting dirty, planting.
Yes.
But that could be done. So that's one avenue to go. In food, you have the farmer's market, right? And you can find a farmer. And again, kind of like selecting a good personal trainer, you're probably going to want to talk to that farmer, because there is some amount of people who are there just reselling other food products. And then there's farmers who are actually growing it themselves. And then among those farmers, there are those who are going kind of the extra mile, and some who they're not going the extra mile. They're still growing food and they're doing their
Or
best.
they're growing it with so much intention and passion and love.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're not certified organic, their practices are better than certified organic would be in bringing it. So asking questions makes the difference. But there's no farmer's market for cannabis, right? That's not.
There's no farmer's market for cannabis. So that's why I'm saying that although it still takes work with food, with your tomato, you can go to a farmer's market and you can talk to different farmers and you can taste their food and you can kind of get to what's best. We have even more bureaucratic layers in front of us in cannabis. So you can only really legally buy it through the Ontario Cannabis Store. There is talk about direct farm gate purchasing. Maybe I'll back up a step and tell you a little bit about our farm. So as you know, I'm a licensed commercial grower. I have what's called a micro cultivation license, and we do full-term outdoor, which means we aren't growing inside. So we don't have lights, we don't have HVAC, we don't have all of these high energy, high input. We don't use any fertilizers, we don't use any herbicides or any pesticides. We are growing in the ground through soil that we've cultivated for years, using various regenerative agriculture techniques to create high quality soil with high organic matter levels, with high microbial microorganisms in our soil. And we grow exceptionally high quality cannabis using all these techniques. But we are obligated by the class of our license to sell our product wholesale, unprocessed, to what's called a standard licensed producer. And then that standard licensed producer needs to get essentially approval from the Ontario Cannabis Store to turn it into some kind of a product, right? So you can smoke cannabis as flower, which most people would be familiar with is the way cannabis is smoking a joint, is the way most people would have consumed cannabis if they happened to be doing it, you know, before legalization. It could be turned into hash. It could be turned into an edible. It can be turned into a variety of different concentrate products where essentially the psychoactive components are kind of being concentrated and extracted from the plant material. And that could be into a vape product. It could be into a dab product like a live rosin. The categories are going on, right? There's blunts are being made. They're infusing blunts with concentrates. They're pre-rolling joints. There are all kinds of different categories. Point I'm trying to make is that the licensed producer needs to get approval to make whatever product they want to make. Once they get approval, then it's going to get shipped to the Ontario Cannabis Store, and then all the various retail stores can purchase the products from the Ontario Cannabis Store, and you can go out as a consumer and purchase your products from those cannabis stores. And then you're depending on the knowledge of the bud tender at the store that you're at as to whether or not they happen to be in the know of what all the products behind them are. And there are a tremendous amount of products. So if you're at a really high quality retail store with bud tenders who really care and really know what they're doing, they may be able to advise you, and they'll have some a high amount of knowledge about where each product came from, how it was processed, how it was grown. But that's going to be pretty rare. So
and you bring something up that's so important to me. So first of all, I don't use it. However, I do grow it because if my children or my friends and my husband are going to use it the same way that I learned how to grow tomatoes, I learned to grow weed from somebody because it makes sense to me that it's outdoors, like all the things that you're doing. What concerns me is you're doing something so exceptional. I've been to your farm. I've witnessed your practices, what you're doing, your passion, your love for it, but I can't buy that directly from you. And now it's going to, this is in Ontario, of course, not globally, but it's going to so many people's hands. And when you're talking about dabs or vapes, like a vape, like no one wants to suck on a vape because a vape pen has, flame retardants, and it has Teflon, it has all these other chemicals that you're getting. So now you've gone to all these efforts to grow this like beautiful, close to nature product. And it's being ultra processed, sort of like growing the best, the best grain in a field. And then it gets sold to craft to make
put into a Twinkie.
Processed, exactly, a Twinkie or an ultra processed crack or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So
and
we're dependent on the short, like, how do I shorten my, whether I'm in Ontario or everything, if I'm not going to grow my own, let's just say we go, that's our best bet, right? Where you learn how, or you grow, or you have a neighbor or best friend who grows, whatever it happens to be. But if I am dependent on purchasing cannabis, no matter where I am in the world, what are questions that I could ask as a consumer to make sure that I'm getting the best? Are there some questions that would help me?
Yeah, so if there are different, like you brought up vapes, there's going to be differences between distillate vapes and what would be called a live resin vape. There's going to be, there's different ways to consume, right? And I think the jury is still out when we're talking about health effects, benefits versus harms, right? And we should be clear, there are potential harms with cannabis, right? You are, like you're talking, you've done one of these on spirits and I think wine and different alcoholic beverages. And I think we can all admit quite openly that there are some harms associated with alcohol consumption, but it can be done responsibly, and we're adults, so you can choose whether you want to use these products or not. And so the same is
our goal here is to help people do what they're choosing to do better, not to tell them to do it or not. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so I want to be clear that regardless of how you're consuming cannabis, there are potential harms. And I don't think it's been studied in detail enough, or at least I'm not confident to make hard recommendations from a health perspective. But I can tell you what I would do, is the best way I can put it. And so I think for most people, edibles, if we're talking about inhaling anything into the lungs, there's potential for harm there. Now, if we compare it to cigarettes, most people, and I'll say most people, aren't going to consume cannabis in the same way they're going to consume cigarettes, meaning they're not smoking 25 joints a day, right? hopefully, maybe, hopefully. For most people, it's something like maybe a couple times a month or maybe a couple times a week. And certainly a lot of people are using it daily, but probably not 25 times a day. So I think you need to be less concerned about inhaling compared to tobacco for sure, but that doesn't mean it's zero risk. So if, there could be concerns about throat cancers and lung cancers and things like this. To my knowledge, it's radically lower in cannabis consumption compared to tobacco consumption. And for my mind, that's probably likely related to the idea that the total amount going in is going to be much lower.
Right.
That said, you can bypass that completely by using edible cannabis products. There is a major risk with edibles if there's any family history of schizophrenia. So again, I'm not an expert in this field, but from my understanding, if there is a family history of schizophrenia or bipolar, I believe, there is a likelihood that high doses of edibles can trigger a schizophrenic episode. So if you know your family history, you can be cautious about that. The other concern is that the time from ingesting the edible until you experience the psychoactive effects is fairly unreliable. It could be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half. And so sometimes people take more than they should because they're waiting for it to kick in. So the advice there is just to be very patient if it's your first time. But you will be completely bypassing the lungs. You're putting a bit more on the liver, of course, so bear that in mind. In terms of inhaling, I think if you're, there's going to be a trade-off between convenience and then high quality, right? So if we're looking at things like using a live rosin dab product or a hash product, we're removing a lot of the plant material, right? So these are concentrated products, which means you're getting a lot of THC and you're getting all the plant terpenes intact. For those who don't know, the plant terpenes are going to be what give the flavor profile. So terpenes are in all plants. It's not something that's exclusive to cannabis. So if you smell a flower, you smell a pine tree and you get that pine smell, it's because it's got a lot of pinene. And there are various combinations of different terpenes that are going to give cannabis its flavor, and they're also going to influence what the high feels like. And so these concentrated products like live rosin and like hash are going to keep these things intact for the most part. So they're going to kind of keep the purity of what the user is looking for, but they're going to remove a lot of the plant material, which means you won't need to be ingesting as much of the plant material. That said, the consumption, like if you Google or YouTube somebody with what's called a dab rig or a glass, it's going to be intimidating for most people, right? Most people might just want to smoke a joint. So unfortunately, again, it's like there's a lot of it depends questions. If you're trying to find out what's the best quality,
I trust the people that have it depends as the answer are the people that I trust.
Well, this is one of the things they say about experts. Whenever somebody tells you like a very direct and very specific, this is the answer, usually that's coming from a place of emotion or, overconfidence or like undue confidence. As you talk to more and more people who really have a deep knowledge, it usually always comes to, well, it depends on this, that, or the other. And, you've heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So usually when people first begin delving into a topic or a subject, their confidence goes through the roof and they think they know everything and they want to tell all their friends and family about everything they've learned. And then generally, as you start to learn more, your confidence goes down because you realize how high the mountain is, right? How much you don't know.
I always say, the more that I learn, the more I realize I know nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah. But to give you an answer that hopefully satisfies you, I would say the best you can do is talk to the bud tenders that you're buying the product from and ask them questions about, where was this grown? Do you know how it was grown? So living soil basically means that you're growing. So in my world, we want high microbial content in our soils and we want a high diversity of different microorganisms. And so are all these little things like bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, like tiny baby insects, and they form an ecosystem inside the soil. And what they're doing is feeding on the plant roots. The sugars that are created from the plant are excreted from the roots, and all these little microbes feed on those things. and they burrow through the soil and create better soil aeration. They pull minerals out of the rock dust that's in the soil and make it available to the plants. They eat each other and poop each other out and make nutrition available for the plants. And so in really healthy soils, they have a high amount of organic matter and they have a high microbial community. And this, in the cannabis world, we call this a living soil. That's compared to what are essentially inert mediums that are just basically a house for the nutrients that are going to be poured into the plants. And so my belief is that a living soil makes a much higher quality plant, which a much more expressive terpene profile. And I believe that that's going to lead to a better experience, like in terms of what the high feels like to you, and it's going to be better for the planet in the long run because there's no distribution system, that there's nobody manufacturing all these different fertilizer products that then need to get packaged up, that then need to get shipped across the country, that then have to be wrapped in all these different bottles of plastics that need to be disposed of. So if you can find a product that's grown in living soil, if it's grown by a craft producer, generally speaking, that's probably a good sign, generally speaking. And then from there, it's up to you to decide how you want to consume it. And, unfortunately, as I said, that really depends. I'd say if you're concerned about inhalation, edibles are a great way to go. If you are concerned about inhalation and you're not bothered by the inconvenience of using some of these concentrate products, the cannabis purists, a lot of them go into dabbing live rosins. And if you're kind of in for convenience and you're not a heavy duty smoker, I'd say just get some weed and roll a joint, or you can get pre-rolls now. It's up to you, but
not all rolling papers are created equal as well.
That's true. Yeah.
That is also a lesson in empathy economics coming.
I forgot who I was talking to. Sorry. Don't get pre-rolls.
Exactly. Don't get the pre-rolls. Roll yourself. Like that's, you talk about craft being better. And as you're speaking, you realize how related this is to anything. I could say like the tomato that comes from a local organic, whether it's certified or not, farmer who wants to have a conversation, who's excited about their everything from seed and soil and bringing it to market, that tomato is always going to taste better. And if you've ever tasted an in-season tomato grown by a happy farmer, whether that's you or somewhere else, you are never going to be able to eat the tomato in season or out of season from a supermarket. It doesn't even taste like a tomato. So if it comes from it's far away and child labor and crappy soil, unhealthy soil, let's call it, with lots of sprays, and then the tomatoes coated in a waxy substance or a peel, which I've written about as well, in order for it to last for transport on a truck and ripening on the way. And like one is close to nature and tastes unreal, and one is far from nature, even though if you put them side by side and you showed them to someone, you're like, what are these? They would both be identified as a tomato, which is why I write not all tomatoes are created equal. So if I'm going to weed, one of the successes that I have with lessons is actually sometimes it's easier for people to not go, oh, that sounds amazing about the tomato, but I freak them out about what's wrong with the tomato, because I really want to hit an aha moment where it's like, wow, I don't want to support child labor. And I didn't know that had a waxy substance that's actually a known carcinogen on it. Let's just say. So if I wanted to do that for weed, your examples and your everything you've shared, I think is so helpful, especially the living soil part. That was something new for me to hear, just because I don't consume cannabis, so I'm aware why I'm relying on you here. What could you say to freak, whether it's a parent of a teen, somebody using, or a user themselves, to say you do not want to be buying this kind of cannabis, and why?
That's a tough one. Well, I'll be honest, I consumed some cannabis when I was a teenager, like many people did. Again, with teens, there is some evidence that the brain's not fully developed until about 25 years old, right? And so I think you'd really want to try to limit consumption as much as possible. but at the same time, kids will be kids, right? So if you're trying to arm them with the best information, I would kind of say the same things. If you can find products that are grown in living soil, I think that would be better. But I mean, really practically, I think it's going to be more about the relationship you have with their child and trying to foster an environment where hopefully they can feel safe about discussing these things with you, or at least not hiding them from you, so you have some idea about how much your child's consuming. And I think it would,
yeah, if I'm taking them to a store, let's just say they're of age, whatever, right?
yeah,
Or they're going to experiment, and I want to say, like, this is what you need to be looking for, and this is what you don't. So you grow your weed outdoors, under sunlight, with love. There's all these in living soil.
yep.
What does the opposite look like? Like indoors with fertilizers? Like what is
Yeah.
the difference is I guess what I'm going for here.
Yeah, that is the difference. Like so there are so many cannabis. It's hard for me to give you a straight answer because there's so many different products now, right? There's so many different categories of ways to consume it. So if we were just talking about flower and you're saying we're going to go buy dry cannabis flower and they're going to roll their own joint or smoke it in a pipe or smoke it in a bong. If we can narrow it to that,
great.
My preference would be towards now. So it should be said that there's a pretty extensive banned substance list, so you can feel pretty confident whatever you're getting that things are tested for like bad microbial content, like harmful microbes, bacterias. They're tested for heavy metals. They're tested for pesticides, so there won't be pesticides on anybody's cannabis because
this is in Ontario, Canada. We should talk about.
Right? In Ontario and I believe Canada-wide. I'm familiar, yeah, because it's regulated by Health Canada, not by there's an Ontario cannabis store responsible for purchasing.
Anyone listening in the US or Europe or somewhere else.
Yeah, you'll have to do your own research there. I'm not familiar with regulations worldwide, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Even our own regulations are, anyways. So in Canada, there's going to be no pesticides. You're going to be tested for heavy metal and you're going to be tested for other contaminants because this is a product which you're inhaling through your lungs. So you can feel confident there regardless of what you're getting, that you won't have those substances in those products in Canada, in an Ontario cannabis store retail outlet. If you're buying it, somewhere on the street, let's just say you're rolling the dice. That's the case where you want to have a relationship with the person that you're buying it from, and whether or not you can trust them, I can't advise you on that, right? That's outside of the legal market. It's anybody's guess. Now, beyond that, my personal preference would be towards things that are using a low energy input. So if it's grown outdoors, that's my preference. If it's grown in living soil, that would be my preference. And if it has a really high terpene percentage, that's a good indication that that was a healthy plant, right? So is there
a number to look for? Is there a metric that is measured?
Yeah, it'll vary again in the category. So if it's dry flower, you're going to get different numbers than if you're in concentrate products. Concentrates are going to have much higher numbers. If you're like around 4% in dry flower, that's a pretty good number, and anything above that is going to be amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll probably see a lot of the products. Am I still here?
Yeah, you're still here.
Okay, great. You'll see a lot of the lower quality products in the kind of 1s and 2s in terms of terpene percentage.
Right. And that's public information. So having that
should be on the package. Most people are advertising. So they're required to list the THC numbers. Most people now who are boasting are putting their terpenes on the package as well because they want to display that.
Right.
Yeah. And so if it doesn't have the terpenes, it's probably a decent indication that it wasn't, that's not something they want to brag about.
Right. And I mean, I love that you equated it to, again, it's not something I'm participating in, but as we're trying to just educate people to do better, I love that you equate that to being a healthy plant, because at the end of the day, my common sense says, like, if anyone is using this, then that we would want everything to come from the healthiest soil and the healthiest plant possible, and then the least processed.
Yes. Yeah, that's how I would say it. Not all processing in cannabis is necessarily bad, like I said. Because you could take the opinion that we're removing plant material, which there's no benefit for the experience or for the psychoactive effect to have lots of plant fibers that you're then inhaling. However, like a lot of the processing that's done, and these are things that are controversial. Like, people like us are going to prefer not to have like butane extraction processes and different hydrocarbon extraction processes. The people who do them will argue like, hey, there's none of that ending up in the final product. So again, kind of jury's out on that.
Right.
But
and as I would say, I just listening to you say that, and I think selfishly is for my human health, that might not be in the final product, but I've still, by purchasing it, supported it being in a supply chain, which is doing damage to our soil, air, water, and supporting a company doing that rather than supporting you who's growing it with love and healthy soil, living soil outdoors. So just that's that whole empathy economics component, which is, it's not just about my experience, it's also like what happened in that whole supply chain, because it's still all something, if we are consuming it, that's energy. And so then the kind and healthy energy all the way through the supply chain really does actually matter, even if we even if we don't prioritize it, it still matters, right?
Yeah. And it's still relatively young in the legal market in Canada. So we could have a future where there is a cannabis farmers market, right? Or there are farm gate. I know, I think farm gate is available now, but it's a whole other kind of licensing process to go through to make it available. It's not something that we're looking very closely at doing on our farm yet. But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that might change, and you might be able to find the farmer directly. Maybe even do a walk, like, if you want to buy beef from me or you wanted to buy pork from me, you can give me a call. You can arrange a time to come and you can visit the pigs and see how they're raised. You can visit the cattle. You can see the chickens. You can look at our compost pile. We'll show you around. We're an open door policy.
And I will tell you, because again, I've been there and we've taken members from the Wellness Intelligence Collective there, that nothing compares after you've had that experience. I'm using your farm as an example, with kind humans who are doing things so passionately, with such conviction, with such honor in so many ways to the entire supply chain, and you really are shortening it. So when I then spend money with you, not only am I getting the best of the best, but I'm giving you all the money directly to reinvest in doing better. So it does matter. And when you switch that to cannabis, it should be the same. So obviously in Ontario, because of the regulations, we gain a lot because, as you said, it has to be tested and it is regulated. So there's bonuses with that. And at the same time, we're losing our connection directly to the grower unless we grow it ourselves. One of the members of the Wellness Intelligence Collective is an expert on helping people grow. So I'm going to loop him into this too, because then that needs to be an option, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Courses.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of growing things yourself, even if only to understand how difficult it is to appreciate what it is you're paying for when you're getting the best quality. Because what a lot of people will end up doing, whether it's vegetables or cannabis, they'll go out and do it themselves. They'll get a little overwhelmed by it. Some percentage of them will like that, and they'll keep going, and they'll grow the best tomato they've ever tasted in their life. And everybody else will kind of go like, oh, wow, like I appreciate how difficult this is now. And I'm happy to give that guy at the farmer's market my money for that exceptional tomato he grew.
Well, value, we talk all the time, it's value versus cost. And there has to be an appreciation in it. And I'll finish by telling my carrot story, which was the first year that I was growing food, and I grew these carrots, and you plant them in the spring, you plant them early, and it's the seeds. I watched them for months and they grew. Oh my God, my carrot tops were the most beautiful things. And I took pictures of them and I posted them, and I was like, I'm amazing. I can't even believe I grew these things. And when it came to harvest time, I pulled it out of the ground and the carrot was honestly like this big.
Oh, yeah.
Big. And I had like this whole bed. And I was like, if there was $1 worth of carrot between my whole carrot patch, right? And I
Yeah.
thought, oh my God, I can buy a bag, or not even a bag, I could buy like a bunch of the best organic carrots from the market for $5. I was like, that's the best deal in the entire world, because I just spent on soil and time and what all this stuff. And so the value, right? My thank you and my gratitude skyrocketed. And that's
Yeah.
why I'm always, to finish, I'm just so grateful for you, because you have this wide scope of everything that you're doing at Pharmacare and on your farm, from weed to pigs and meat and eggs, and raising your daughter, as well as you and Brandy having, this very active movement component and for well-being. And I just think if everybody had such a well-rounded perspective, or access to people that did, what a better world it would really be. And so thank you for contributing so positively in knowledge, but also in action, and allowing us to have access to you as a trainer and as a farmer and as an educator. It's a gift. So thank you, Chris.
Well, it's my great pleasure. Thank you very much.